Even so, a battle was raging in the early churches. Arius, a monastic from the city of Alexandria, believed that Jesus was the highest created being, but he was not God. In vehement opposition to this opinion was Athanasius, bishop of the Alexandrian Church. It was his passionate belief that Jesus was both man and God. These two men fought fiercely over this one question: was the Savior human, or was he divine? For the sake of his Roman Empire, Constantine needed to solve this bitter dispute once and for all. And thus, 300 years after the Romans executed Jesus, Constantine summoned all the Christian bishops in order to unify the church. The meeting was to take place in his summer palace in the seaside resort of Nicaea in what is today modern Turkey.
When he brought all the bishops together at Nicaea, what was on his mind was that they all would agree on the question, the divinity and the humanity of Jesus. How was that to be explained? And the important thing for him was one explanation. So there was a huge pressure on them to agree on something. They had to walk out in agreement.
The agreement these bishops would hammer out eventually became known as the Nicene Creed. It declared that Jesus was both man and God. Athanasius, the bishop from Alexandria, had won the day.
I believe in one God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven. All of these concepts are in the creed, but they're biblical concepts. So the point then is, let's put together a work, a volume, a book, a codex. Let us now decide what will go into it, into the canon, that can be acceptable to the entire church. Not one piece here, one piece there, to the entire church.
One man who was present at the Council of Nicaea was Eusebius, bishop of Caesarea in Palestine. Eusebius was fascinated by Christian antiquities, and he had immersed himself in the manuscripts housed in two nearby Christian libraries, one in Caesarea, another in Jerusalem. The same year the Council of Nicaea met, Eusebius published his church history. In it was a list of 18 books he believed should make up a Christian canon.
And what was interesting about that is that he mentions 3 different types of books that people were reading. There were the accepted ones, such as the 4 Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, Paul's letters. These were all accepted.
Next in order, the extant former Epistle of John, and likewise the Epistle of Peter, must be recognized. After these must be put, if it really seems right, the Apocalypse of John, concerning which we shall give the different opinions at the proper time.
Eusebius was only too aware that many of his contemporaries thought John's Apocalypse bordered on the heretical, that its violent imagery seemed at war with the Savior's message of peace.
Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and threw it into the sea, saying, With such violence Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down, and will be found no more.
Do you really want to have a book like that in the canon, with all the fire and brimstone and the hatred and the anger and the animosity that is found there? Do you really want all that damnation in the Bible?
But he mentions other ones that he thinks are disputed, including ones that we now have in. For example, 2nd and 3rd letter of John, 2nd letter of Peter, letter of James, letter of Jude. He calls them disputed. And he mentions other ones that are not in at the moment. And then there's the heretical ones that are not in anyone's list.
Books that were considered forbidden were books that aren't really sanctioned. In other words, you have things like The Shepherd of Hermas that are stories that are being told about Jesus, but they don't have any veracity. They may be part of a certain community's canon, but they're not part of the total canon. In other words, they're not things that people in other parts of the Christian world would recognize.
6 years after the Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine sent a letter to Bishop Eusebius, giving him the job of creating an official Christian Bible.
I have thought it expedient to instruct your prudence to order 50 copies of the sacred scriptures to be written on prepared parchment in a legible manner and in a convenient portable form by professional transcribers thoroughly practiced in their art.
Eusebius simply took the list from the church history he had written, 18 books he believed worthy of inclusion, and assembled these into Constantine's Bible. In stark contrast to Marcion's version of a Christian Bible, this volume combined the Hebrew Scriptures with a set of Christian manuscripts, an Old and a New Testament.
50 beautiful Bibles done on vellum and parchment for the churches of Constantinople. There's no indication that Constantine saw a problem with disputed books or different canons or different lists. That's not there at all. What he seemed to be concerned with is Constantinople, his new capital called after himself, of course, was going to have lots of new churches. He wanted a beautiful Bible enshrined in each of those churches.
But this Bible, commissioned by the Roman emperor, was lost to time, and with it, the precise list of books it contained.
There are possibilities. For example, we have two 4th century codices, books of the Bible, the entire Bible. One is called the Codex Vaticanus because it's in the Vatican. The other is the Codex Sinaiticus, which is in the British Library. It was found at Mount Sinai, St. Catherine's Monastery. And we can't be sure of the contents because there's missing pages.
If either of these ancient fragmentary documents are indeed copies of Constantine's Bible, it appears their contents differ from Eusebius's list. There are at least 2 disputed books included in Codex Sinaiticus: the Shepherd of Hermas, a popular book among early Christians, and the Epistle of Barnabas. Yet even after Constantine's beautifully rendered Bibles were sent to the churches in Constantinople, it would be another 40 years before a final list of 27 New Testament books would be officially canonized by the Church.
What we